Hello, this is Shane from Greenstone Services. Today we're going to talk about something a little bit different. We're going to talk about SSDs in Windows 7. There's a few people and a few companies that have slightly older machines that if they just upgrade their hard drives to solid state devices versus the typical platter drives, their machines that are now running Windows 10 that originally had Windows 7 on would be running really well. A few people have done this themselves, and one of the issues that I've come across with that is typically softwares that automatically import your operating system over to the SSD drive, although great, and it does make it easy, they don't know about the little settings that you need, such as trim, page files, etc. And in this, we'll be taking a look at that. In Windows 7, if we had just transferred from a regular hard drive to a SSD hard drive because we're trying to save our machine because we know our hard drive's going bad, here's how we would go about doing that. We would right click on computer and go to manage, and then under device manager you would want to check your IDE ATA ATAPI controllers. Notice at the very bottom mine says SATA AHCI. This AHCI, this is one of the most important things because without this, a lot of the software from Samsung, ADATA, etc. will not allow you to use the extended features of the solid state drive. If you do have AHCI enabled, that's wonderful. If you don't, then you might want to go into BIOS and get that reconfigured, but let me give you a warning. If you do that and you don't know how to change the drivers in Windows on boot so that it supports AHCI, don't mess with it. Your machine will blue screen and then you'll be mad at me. So don't do it unless you know what you're doing. The second thing to look at is to check to see if trim is already enabled. Under command prompt, it is fsutil behavior query disable delete notify. And whenever you press enter at the end of that, you'll get either a 0 or a 1. If you receive a 1, that means that trim is not enabled and Windows 7 is not going to be treating your SSD drive very well at all. So we need to fix that. And it's much the same command. We just press the up key one time and then type in set after behavior and then disable, delete, notify, and then put a 0 at the end and press enter. Now notice that changed it, and then we can verify it by going back to our original command of query and see we have a 0. So once we have our trim set up, that's two things off of my official checklist. I have ACHI and then I have my trim set up, which is great. So we'll exit out of there. You want to go to services.msc. Once we have our services.msc open, you can press S to get to the S's, and then we will find Superfetch. Now, more than likely, yours will be enabled and started. So click Stop first, which will bring up a progress window. And once it gets done, change it to Disabled and hit Apply, and hit OK. So we've turned it off in services, but does that mean that it's actually off? Maybe not. Because the next step that we need to do is we need to go into the registry. So regedit, right click, run as admin. So once in regedit, you will find this under H key local machine, system, current control set, control, session manager, memory management, and then prefetch. And whenever you're in prefetch parameters, you will be able to see you have enable prefetcher and enable superfetch. We want these guys off. On a machine that hasn't been set up before, these default values are 3. We want to change them down to 0. 0 means no. So once we get those guys switched over to 0, you can safely close this. Okay, now that we have ACHI, trim, prefetch, and superfetch taken care of, it's now time to take care of our page file. Now, Page files in the past have been an important thing because they help with the memory management of the machine, in that, let's say, Chrome or Firefox or another program is taking too long to respond. What it will do is the machine will move the pieces of memory into the page file. Most of the bottleneck in computers has always been the hard drive. Now, in the past, sometimes it was the processor and the memory. But if you've got a machine that has an i5 and you've got 8 gigs of RAM and you have a SSD, there should be little to no bottleneck whatsoever, unless you're really taking advantage of your processor. So do we even need a page file at this point? The answer is quite simply no. So to get to it, you click on Start, right-click on Computer, and go to Properties. Once in Properties, Advanced System Settings, and then click on Performance, Advanced, and then Virtual Memory. The custom size to clicking on No Page File and Set, and then you click on Yes. And then you click on OK. And then OK again, and OK again. And then you can close this window. Now this one takes a little while. This one has to do with indexing, which is Windows just trying to keep track of where each and every file on your computer is. You see this little checkbox right here? That needs to be unchecked. And then you click on Apply. Now, eventually, you may want to re-enable indexing for things like your documents. If you run into an error, you can click on Ignore All if you like, or try again until you go blue in the face, but eventually you'll click on Ignore All because it is Windows. And the machine will go through and take that indexing volume off of all the files, which means that as your machine is running, that SSD isn't always going to be wrote to and read from, which will extend the life of your PC. That's the reason why we turn the indexing and page file off. It's not so much to help with Windows, it's moreover to help with your SSD and protecting it. There is a side note to be said here though. If you have a good enough SSD drive that has either an appropriate 3D NAND or a 2D NAND, with those two things turned off, even when you do a search, it will happen fast enough that you really won't care that they're on or off. Okay, now that that is finished, we will move on. The next thing has to do with power management. Now, on a laptop, this is going to be something that you should use discretion on. On a desktop PC hooked up to a battery, this should be something you use, again, discretion on. However, if your computer is always going to be on, then we need to go check out those power management settings. And there's two ways to get there. That was one, which is you click on Control Panel, and you can actually type to the power options, which is highly useful. Or another preferred way I see people use a lot is Personalize, Screensaver, Change Power Settings, and then you're there. Then we need to look at the plan settings themselves. Now in here, notice this is a laptop, so plugged in, I have everything set to never. On battery, I have a respectful amount set. On a computer that's not a laptop or hooked up to a battery that has a automatic sleep or automatic shutdown, there's an important thing to do. So what you would type in command prompt is power CFG space H for hibernation and then off. And once you type that and press enter, there's roughly 2 gigs of information that will disappear off of that hard drive. The information is just a file that Windows keeps for the current state of your machine and what your machine is doing, so that if it has to go into hibernation, it can do it fairly quickly and come out of it fairly quickly. So once you type this command, it gets rid of that information, which saves on your SSD. The next thing has to do with the actual caching policy of Windows. On Windows 7, there's a couple ways to get there, as there always is. Let's just do this by going to Computer, right-clicking, Manage, and then under Device Manager, let's get to our disk, and then we will open our primary disk, which mine is the Samsung, and then I want to go to Policies. Now, if by chance you have two things of information here, the top one being a removal policy, the bottom one being a write caching policy. On the top one for the removal policy, select better performance, because you're not really going to be ejecting your SSD. And typically, unless this is set up so that it's on a server that has a RAID with a battery in it, I leave enable write caching on the device. That way, if it has enough time to write the stuff it needs to back to the hard drive in an event of a power out, you don't lose critical data. The next thing to look into is, again, under Services, .msc. You'll want to go to W for Windows and look for Search. And you don't really want Search always probing your hard drive relentlessly unless you initiate it yourself. Right-click and hit Stop. And then open it, and instead of automatic delayed, set it to disabled, apply, OK, and that's it for that guy. And the last one has to do with that page file and large system cache, getting rid of these things whenever you turn your computer off, which can cause the system to hang a little bit whenever you're shutting down. So you'll find that under H key, local machine, current control set, control session manager, memory management, and they need to be set to, of course, 0. So notice that my clear page file is set to 0, and large system cache is again set to 0. With those two done, I will exit out of that. And then I would encourage, if you have a Samsung or ADATA, that you go to their website to support and look up to see if they have a program that helps with their SSD drive. Samsung has the Magician, others have other products, but on my Samsung Magician, whenever it's open on its home page, I can see all the important information right up front. I know that AHCI is activated, I know that trim status is enabled, and I know that rapid mode is on. And everything is working fairly well. I know it was long. Thank you for being patient and working your way through it with me. At this point, go ahead and click like, share, all that kind of a thing. If you didn't like it, feel free to let me know about that too. Beyond that, I hope that you had a good day. Restart your computer and enjoy.